Level 1. Medical student. You don't touch a brain for 4 years. Nobody told you that when you applied. You were 22, you got in, and you spent a week telling everyone who would listen. Your parents cried. Your mom called her friends. You felt like you'd already made it. You hadn't made it. You hadn't started. Day 1, they hand you a textbook, anatomy, 1,400 pages. There's another one behind it, and another behind that. Your professor walks in, looks at the room, and says something you'll hear in different versions for the rest of your career, that half the things you're about to learn will be wrong in 10 years, and nobody knows which half. Then he starts teaching anyway. First 2 years, you don't see a single patient. You sit in lecture halls and memorize the name of every nerve, every vessel, every bone in the human body. You memorize what happens when they fail. You memorize the drugs that fix them, and the doses, and the side effects, and the contraindications. You take exams every few weeks that feel like someone built a trap specifically for you. You fail one. Pharmacology. You stare at the score for a long time. You retake it. You pass by 6 points. You never tell anyone the first number. Your family still doesn't fully understand what you do. They tell people at dinner that you're going to be a brain doctor. You correct them. They do it again at the next family event. You stop correcting them. Year 3, you enter hospitals for the first time. You're not treating anyone. You're following doctors around and trying to look useful and trying not to be in the way. You rotate through every department. Emergency medicine, cardiology, psychiatry, pediatrics. Each one has a version of the same pitch. This is the best specialty. You should stay here. Then you rotate through neurosurgery. 6 weeks. You watch one craniotomy through a camera feed because there's no room for you at the table. The patient is 44. Brain tumor, left temporal lobe. The surgery takes 9 hours. You stand the entire time. You don't see much. You don't understand most of what you see. You go home and decide this is what you're doing with your life. You apply to neurosurgery residency programs. Your advisor tells you it's the most competitive specialty in medicine, fewer spots than any other field, thousands of applicants. He says this carefully, the way people say things when they're trying to manage expectations without saying, "I don't think you'll get it." You apply anyway. Level 2. Resident. Match day. You find out where you're spending the next 7 years of your life from an envelope. You matched. Somewhere in Ohio. It wasn't your first choice. It doesn't matter. You're in. Your intern year, that's year 1 of 7, is built to break you. Not accidentally, deliberately. The theory is that pressure reveals who can actually do this. 30-hour shifts are legal. You will do them regularly. You will do post-op checks at 3 a.m. on patients you've never met, writing notes on charts you have to read twice just to remember who the person is. 4 months in, you make a mistake on a medication order, a small one. Nothing happens to the patient. An attending calls you into a room and sits across from you and explains, quietly, without raising his voice, exactly what could have happened. You don't make that mistake again. Year 2, you're allowed to cut. Not alone. Your attending is across the table, watching every move. But your hands are inside a human skull, and that is different from everything that came before it in a way you won't be able to explain to anyone who hasn't been there. First case you actively participate in, a blood clot pressing on the motor cortex of a 51-year-old man. The attending guides you through the bone work. You close the wound at the end. It takes you twice as long as it should. Nobody rushes you. The man wakes up, moves his right arm on command. You eat a vending machine sandwich in the parking lot at midnight and feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, something quieter than that. Years 3 through 6, you climb. The cases get harder. The autonomy increases slowly. You do your first solo case in year 4, a shunt revision, technically straightforward, and you stand at that table alone, and the room is quiet, and your attending is just outside, and everything depends on your judgment. It goes fine. Your chief year, year 7, you're running the floor. You're managing junior residents who come to you with questions you remember not knowing the answers to. You operate on tumors that take 8 hours. You also do the scheduling. Nobody warned you about the scheduling. You interview for fellowship programs. You match again, 1 more year. Level 3. Fellow. Fellowship is where you stop being a general neurosurgeon and become a specific one. You chose skull base surgery. The others in your residency class chose spine, or vascular, or pediatrics. You chose the corner of the field where 1 millimeter in the wrong direction means your patient wakes up unable to see, or speak, or swallow. Your fellowship director has been doing this for 31 years. He doesn't repeat himself. He doesn't slow down for you. You watch him remove a tumor the size of a golf ball from a location that most surgeons won't go near. 3 hours, no music in the OR, complete silence except the instruments and the monitors and his instructions, which come in short, precise sentences with no wasted words. The patient wakes up intact. You study his hands the way you studied for your pharmacology exam, obsessively, looking for the thing you keep missing. You build a library in your muscle memory, 1 case at a time. 12 months, hundreds of cases. At the end of it, you are a different surgeon than the one who walked in. You apply for attending positions. Level 4. Attending surgeon. You have your own patients now. This part nobody can train you for. When a family sits across from you and asks what happens next, the answer comes from you. There is no attending above you to look at. The family is looking at you. You give them an answer and you live with it. First year, you operate conservatively. You know your limits. You refer the cases that sit outside them. Some colleagues read this as timidity. It isn't. It's the judgment that separates good surgeons from disasters, and you've seen enough disasters to understand the difference. You lose a patient. 63 years old. Glioblastoma. The surgery went perfectly. Clean margins, no complications, textbook closure. The cancer didn't care. 3 months later, she's gone. You sit with the family. You say the things you prepared yourself to say in residency for moments exactly like this. The words don't feel like enough. They never do. You learn this, you carry it, and you go back in the next morning because there's another patient and another surgery, and the work doesn't pause for you to process anything. Years pass. A reputation builds. Other surgeons start sending you their harder cases. The complexity of what lands on your table is the field's way of telling you what it thinks of you. You stop referring cases out. You stop second-guessing the calls you make in the room. You are, at this point, one of the better surgeons in your region. You know this not because anyone says it, but because of who's calling you and what they're calling you about. Level 5, Chief of Surgery. You run the department now. This means you still operate. You always still operate, but it also means budget meetings. It means hiring decisions. It means sitting across from a resident who's struggling and deciding whether what they need is support or an honest conversation about whether they're in the right field. You've trained 21 residents over your career. They're attendings now, scattered across the country at their own hospitals, making their own calls, training their own residents. Some of them are better than you were at their age. That was always the goal. Medical students rotate through your service and watch you the way you once watched your fellowship director. They're standing too far from the table to see much. They don't understand most of what they see. A few of them will go home and decide this is what they're doing with their lives. You operate for the last time on a Tuesday. You knew going in it would be the last. You didn't tell anyone. You didn't want the room to feel like a ceremony. Pituitary adenoma. Routine by your standards. 1:40. Clean. You close. You step back. You pull off your gloves. The scrub tech, she's worked with you for 19 years, looks at you from across the table. She knows. You nod once. You change and walk to the parking lot and sit in your car without starting it. You think about the 51-year-old who moved his arm. You think about the 63-year-old whose family you sat with and the words that didn't feel like enough. You think about the intern who failed pharmacology and passed by 6 points and stood in a parking lot at midnight eating a vending machine sandwich, feeling something quieter than happiness. Medicine never asked if you were ready. It just asked if you were going to show up. For 34 years, you showed up.